Will You Remember Me version 2. And this time it is two fingers. Will you remember me? Will you remember me? Will you remember me? Will you remember me? There'll be times in your life when I'm long gone. A smile will come across your face. A fragrance of cologne or perfume in the air that will take you back to that place. Will you remember my smile, or remember my grin, or remember how we were when we were friends? Do you remember the time that we had a falling out and we didn't ever speak again? Will you remember me? 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 Will you remember that my favorite color is yellow? Will you remember that I was an honorable fellow? Will you remember that I knew the way of the fist and fighting something I couldn't resist? Will you remember the times that I cried in my sleep? Will you remember the nights I spent at your house giving you my prayers? Will you remember the time that we was at the beach and all we did was stare at those girls and those thongs as we went along and things were going super fly? And then it all came to an end as my life was tragically over 'cause I died. Will you remember me? 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 Will you remember my favorite TV show? Will you remember the crush I had on the Yellow Ranger, yo? Will you remember my kung fu dreams of being a star? And how everyone got in my way so I didn't get real far. And closing as I look up to the sky from the hell that I went through. Now I'm looking down at you from heaven and there's nothing I can do. Will you remember me? 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 Remember me.